I grew up in Miami Beach. So, right, is this on? It's on now, okay. So this was quite a shock to my system, this temperature. I don't know if I one time when I was about 20, I lived for a winter in Sweden. So I guess this would be kind of warm for Sweden, but anyway. It was the fall of 1979. I was 23 years old, and I was in a room in Gainesville, Florida, and I had a very powerful, I guess everyone was, but a very dramatic, life-changing, born-again experience. I was born again. I know the right when it happened. And when I was born again, I became a believer. I knew nothing, almost nothing about Christianity. And almost most of what I knew was wrong. Okay, all I know is, as I said earlier, had you told me the night I was born again, Cliff, you're a sinner, I want to know what you were talking about. It just wasn't, it was just a vocabulary and a worldview that was completely alien from me. All I knew is I met the Lord that night. I had to do something drastic, and I did it, and I gave my heart to the Lord. Well, the next day, I go to this health food store where I had met some Christians. And it turned out they were Seventh-day Adventists, okay? Now, I knew nothing. I didn't even know then. It took me a week or two before I knew they were Adventists. They didn't tell me they were Seventh-day Adventists, and had they told me, it would have meant nothing to me, because I didn't really know anything about Seventh-day Adventists. Though I mentioned earlier at Sabbath school, I thought about it later, I knew one Seventh-day Adventist growing up, and this kid used to sell me drugs, illegal drugs. That was the only Seventh-day Adventist I knew. So anyway, I meet these people in a health food store, and I said I wanted to study the Bible. Okay, and they said, what do you want to study? And to this day, I don't know why I asked them this. Again, picture this. I don't know anything about them. I don't know their religion, nothing. And I said, I want to study about America in prophecy. Is America in the Bible? Okay, now again, I look back. There's so many things I look back over the decades, over my conversion, that just amaze me. But I had no idea. I said, Adventist, I want to study the Bible. And they said, yeah, we could do that. I think we could do that. And anyway, the first thing they do, my first Bible study ever, they take me to Daniel 2. And Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, then Rome, then the breakup of Rome into the nations of modern Europe, partly weak, partly strong, will cling but not mingle. And I can remember, it was 1979. This is logical, rational evidence. And I remember looking at this, and I remember bursting into tears. And they didn't know what to do with me because I never had anybody so open. And I'm just going, man, it's all true. It's all true, because I defy anybody anywhere to explain to me how Daniel 2 could have been written, not only if there was not a God, but a God who could predict and knows the future. I defy anybody. And what they try to do is they have been trying for centuries. If you open up a Bible commentary today, outside of Adventism, They'll all tell you that Daniel wasn't written when Daniel said. It was written in the 2nd century BC. Okay, it's called the Maccabean hypothesis. I mean, you can't have somebody predicting the future. So even Bible scholars, others, they'll put Daniel in 2nd century BC, okay? I absolutely, totally, 100% reject that. It's nonsense to me. But for argument's sake, you can have it. You're so bent on it, you want to believe it, fine. Explain to me how, because they'll all put Daniel, maybe the latest, 150, 160 BC. Explain to me how a guy living almost 200 years before Jesus could so accurately depict the breakup of Rome into the nations of modern Europe that we see today. In other words, the prophecy is so strong. You know, I don't know if you guys, I've read so many books about the British royal family. I'm just fascinated by it. I just love all the fun and all that with it. Do you know what the House of Windsor, that's not their real name. Does anybody know who they really are, what their name of the House of Windsor really is? Huh? Safi Coburg Gotha. They're Germans. They were Germans. They're all Germans. Well, World War I is going on, and the Germans have a bomber named the Gotha, Saxe Coburg Gotha. And you know, they've always been anti-royal sentiment there. So whoever was, I forgot, Albert or whoever it was, right about the time of the war, they thought it might be good PR, and they changed the name to Windsor, House of Windsor. But talk about a perfect metaphor for prophecy. They were interrelated, mingle themselves with the seed of men. They were Germans, but not cling one to another. They were killing each other right at that time. So anyway, it was very powerful evidence for me. And to this day, decades later, Daniel 2, I told you earlier how logical my faith is. Daniel 2 is part of the pillars of that logic. Well, after Daniel 2, they took me to Daniel 7. And again, if you know, you got the same emphasis, Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, but a great deal of emphasis on the fourth beast, Rome, and the little horn power that comes out of it, and all that. They walk me through it, and think to change times and laws, and persecuting power, the papacy, and I could see, wow, this is papal Rome. And it meant so much to me because I grew up, Christians were the enemy, persecuting us for centuries. And Rome, where do you think the Germans got the yellow star from? They got it from the Catholics who made the Jews wear them. Okay, the Germans just took it a little further than the Catholics did. But anyway, and that just, wow, that answered so many questions for me as a Jew, because it was tough. Me, Jewish, accepting Jesus, it's a tough slog. And anyway, then they took me to Revelation 13, and we went through the whole thing with, after some of those same powers appear again that were in Daniel, clearly Rome and the time prophecies. Then I saw in Revelation 13:11, then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And it took a while. It took a while for me, but then I could clearly see how the only thing that made sense, this had to be the United States of America, whatever questions remained. And, and if you want to think about it too, the other thing too, this is like, okay, I don't even know their evidence, and I ask them about American prophecy. Those of you who are old enough to remember, the week I got my first Bible study on American prophecy. And the way to get to America in the Bible, you got to go through Rome first. The week they studied that prophecy with me was the week John Paul II visited the United States. And remember those people, that picture of Jimmy Carter, the first time a pope was ever allowed into the White House, and there's Jimmy Carter shaking hands with the Pope in the White House. I mean, it was powerful, and it really made an impact on me. And I was very quickly convicted of the truth of what they were teaching me. However, there was one slight problem. This was 1979. Now, those of you who are old enough to remember, in 1979, we had a problem. It was called the CCCP, the Soviet Union. The world was divided, and Camp Narn missiles nukes up the wazoo, okay? I mean, America, we were still licking our wounds from Vietnam. There were communist uprisings in Cambodia and Laos. The Sandinistas took over in Nicaragua. Fidel Castro was sending troops to Angola. I mean, we had this little tin pot dictator right off the coast, and we couldn't do a thing because of the Soviet Union. So I'm thinking, how in the world is prophecy gonna be America fulfill its prophecy? Prophecy, what? Was the Soviet Union gonna just disappear or something? Well, of course, it took 10 years, and that's exactly what happened. And today we are the United States. We are the world's greatest superpower politically, militarily, and especially militarily, economically. I mean, this has been the role of the United States for a while now. But you know, the first time Adventists started to identify that beast power as America, it was the 1850s. Okay, 1851, okay? America was still 10 years away from the Civil War, which almost destroyed it. The United States, we were nowhere near the kind of political and military power with the kind of hegemony that we have now. We were nothing. We had like a decrepit navy of 86 ships. Okay, in 1876, 25 years after that, Native American tribes butchered General George Armstrong Custer's 7th Cavalry Regiment. And this was the power that's going to enforce the mark of the beast on the world. This is what our pioneers taught long before America assumed what it did. And of course, after the collapse of the Cold War, I mean, no power comes close to the United States, at least militarily. I looked this up the other day working on this. You take what we spend on the military, you take the next, I believe, 9 largest spenders, China, India, Russia, Saudi Arabia, France, Germany, United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, Brazil, combined. You take all of their spending combined. That's what you need to reach what the U.S. does. I've been in parts of the world. I've seen where the U.S. has bombed people. I was in Serbia not long after that whole mess 20-some years ago. I mean, you'd be walking down the street in the middle of the city, and there'd be this bombed out building, just a heap of rubble. And the Adventists told me we were firing tomahawks from 400 miles away. and they just kind of veered around and came. And the Adventists said they sat on the roof of the seminary, and they'd see them, and they would have bets or whatever on how many seconds till it hit the building and blew up. And that was 20 years ago. I can't imagine the technology we have today, okay? I read this article, too, a while back. The Wall Street Journal said something like China was starting to get in our face, and this article a couple of years ago said China just better be careful. People have greatly underestimated the power of the United States. And anyway, but what about the mark of the beast stuff, okay? Can we really, again, I don't know how it's all gonna play out, but can we really believe it's gonna have to do with Sabbath and Sunday? Can we really believe that? Well, you know, we do have some precursors. Death over the seventh-day Sabbath. Go back, well, for example, well, first of all, come with me to jumping ahead here. Come with me to the book of Revelation. All right, well, when you read Revelation, Revelation depicts final events as centering around worship. Okay, it's worship, okay? You worship either the beast in its image, Revelation 14:9, or you worship God, the Creator, the one who made heaven and the earth and the sea and the fountains of waters, Revelation 14:7. This is language directly from the fourth commandment, Exodus, the seventh-day Sabbath. This is the one commandment that expressly shows why we should worship God. He is the Creator. And this is the commandment that Rome sought to change. I mean, replacing God's basic decree of creation with a man-made thing. And we all know the quotes. I remember in the beginning, I'd read all these, Adventists gave me all these Roman Catholic quotes about admitting to change the Sabbath. And you read them to Protestants and they go nuts over that. Anyway, so you got Rome admitting. Meanwhile, you got the depiction twice of God's followers as, quote, keeping the commandments of God. Revelation 12:17 and Revelation 14:12. And that includes the fourth commandment, the commandment that almost none of them keep now because Rome changed it to Sunday. And they worship God because He is the Creator and Redeemer. He is the only one worthy of our worship. And there's no more, think about it, there's no more foundational symbol of God as our Creator than the seventh-day Sabbath. I mean, this is the thing that they sought to usurp. I mean, it's a symbol that goes back to Eden. It goes to the pre-fall world. It's right at the very base of creation of the world here, the seventh-day Sabbath. And for an earthly power, in a sense to usurp, try to usurp this most basic sign of God as the Creator, of the most basic doctrine, God as the Creator. It's an attempt to usurp the Lord's authority at the most basic level possible. God as Creator. The only level more basic is God Himself, okay? And no entity can get to Him. It instead gets as close as possible. The foundation sign embedded, so important that every week, once a week without exception, we are commanded by God to keep this sign, to remember Him as the Creator. And this symbol is so important, folks. We don't go to it. What does it do instead? it comes to us. Every week without exception, this sign, foundational sign of God as our creator, comes to us instead of us having to go to them. Okay, so I think it's pretty important. But really now, as I said earlier, death over the seventh-day Sabbath, well, in Matthew 12, after Jesus healed on the Sabbath the man with the withered hand, how did the religious leaders, the people in power, respond? But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. Kill Jesus not because he healed the man, but because he healed him on the Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath. Death because of an issue regarding the seventh-day Sabbath. In John 5, 1 through 16, after another miraculous healing on the seventh day, the leaders, quote, John 5:16, persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him because he had done this on the Sabbath. Again, death because of the seventh-day Sabbath. Though the specific issue here isn't the same as final events, it's close enough. It's human tradition versus the Word of God in regard to God's fourth commandment, the seventh-day Sabbath. See, from my perspective now, over the years, it's hard for me to see how the issue in the last day over worship is going to be over anything other than the seventh-day Sabbath. It's just so clear. I can't see it. It's so foundational. It's so basic, and so on. It won't be over the one commandment that points to God as the creator and that reveals why we should worship him. The one commandment that the beast power usurped. And remember, we either worship the beast in its image or we worship the creator. And the beast power, it's solely, totally, only Rome. That's all it ever was. It's all it ever will be. So it's one group, one or the other. Now, can you see the point here too? And I've derived this from the Bible. It's not Ellen White. Now, again, I don't know how it's all going to play out. Talked about this earlier. That we're only given a very broad scope here. But it's very clear, this Sunday, and now those of you who saw the news, they're talking now, this one group about wanting to make Sunday the uniform day of rest and so on. And the irony is, a lot of our Sunday-keeping friends, they'll go to church on Sunday, then they'll go over, you guys got Cracker Barrel here? You know Cracker Barrel? Oh, yeah. So they'll go to church, they'll have their worship, the service, they'll go to Cracker Barrel, the wives will go to the mall, and the husbands will go home and watch NFL on their Lord's Day, but dare imply that they're worshiping on the wrong day or it's not biblical. Go figure. Now, there's something else. Ellen White said something. This is in great controversy. It's the only Ellen White I'm going to use. Through two great errors, the immortality of the soul and Sunday sacredness, Satan will bring people under his deceptions. While the former lays the foundation of spiritualism, the latter creates a bond of sympathy with Rome. The Protestants of the United States will be foremost in stretching their hands across the gulf to grasp the hand of spiritualism. They will reach over the abyss to clasp their hands with the Roman power And under this threefold union, this country will follow in the steps of Rome in trampling the rights of conscience. Now, what's this grasping the hand of spirit? We all know the Rome thing. That's obvious, and I want to look at that a little more. How many of you here have all heard of NDEs, near-death experiences? My goodness, they're everywhere. And you got, Angel Studios, the one that did that Messiah series, they had a movie out, NDEs. Look, proof that when you die, you go right to heaven. I mean, they're books. I just finished writing a book on this. And I got all these books that are written by Christians talking about near-death experiences. They die and they leave their body and they float up among them. Let me read you. See, they're not using Ouija boards. They're not using seance. They're not using that. Is that the vast, vast majority of Christians, Catholics, Protestants, because they do not understand the state of the dead, is bought open to this stuff. Why? They're wide open. They bought it hook, line, and sinker. You could read over and over these Christians talking about this. But you think about it, folks, these are just near-death experiences. And to be near death is no more to be dead than to be near pregnant is to be pregnant. Okay? And so it would be presumptuous. You'd think it would be presumptuous to read so much in what the near dead could tell you about the real dead. You'd think they'd be, let me read you. Each one is unique. You can get online. I did it only because I'm in it. Actually, it was funny because before I had an experience like this. I wasn't anywhere near dead. Right before I got converted, I was having this out-of-body stuff. And I thought this was God. I thought this was the truth. Okay? And then I got converted. It was Satan's last-ditch effort to get me away from Christianity. He saw what was coming. And so after I gave my heart to Jesus, they never came back. And for decades, I wouldn't touch the stuff. Because I learned very early on, because I had opened that door once, I was susceptible to it. I waited 45 years or 40-some years before I delved back into this to write this book. And I get on these, I follow on Facebook near-death experience blogs. And every now and then I'll throw something in. I'm trying to do some good. But let me just give you, here's a typical example of the experiences that these people have, okay? I left my body. I could see it, but I was no longer attached to it. There was no pain, no panic, just complete awareness. And then something unexpected happened. I had a life review. Every single person I had ever loved appeared before me. I remembered what they smelled like, what they sounded like, faces from my childhood, loved ones I had forgotten, people who had passed years ago. And then I arrived somewhere. It was the most beautiful peace I've ever known. Not just emotionally, but physically, visually, spiritually. The colors, the calm, the overwhelming presence of love. They all talk about love. It was heaven, or at least a part of it. Then a light appeared. But as it got closer, I saw it wasn't just a sunset. There was a silhouette of a man made of light, love, peace, power, and truth. But not just any man, it was God. I knew it instantly. He didn't have to say his name. He was the name. His presence said everything. There are thousands and thousands of these scientifically documented. So again, it's not Ouija boards and seances. They're scholarly journals of near-death studies. This came from called the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. And it calls itself the largest NDE website in the world. Its mission, it says, is, quote, to research and study consciousness experiences and to spread the message of love, unity, and peace around the world. And then, on that same page was a photo of a sign. And you know what word that had on the sign? Nirvana. Nirvana. I mean, that aside, this should caution. This should be a caution, and has served for some as a caution about NDEs, because of the thousands and thousands and thousands of these experiences. They leave their bodies, okay? They talk about meeting their dead relatives. Okay, I met somebody one time who had that, and I tried to say his grandfather, and I said, no, your grandfather's sleeping. He says, no, I know my grandfather. But they have these experiences, and with almost no renewed sense of any need for Jesus. I've read a lot of them, the vast, vast, vast majority talk about encounters with the being or beings of light, and of warmth and love and compassion, and who gives them platitudes about kindness and loving animals and all this wonderful stuff, but nothing, not one word about sin, about repentance, about judgment to come. If this were a foretaste of the Christian heaven, don't you think they maybe could have gotten a little foretaste of Christian theology? But in 99.9% of the cases, every now and then there'll be one or two coming back talking about giving their heart to Jesus. Well, what a powerful deception. If you got 1,000 who just meet some being of light and love, and I remember too, in fact, I remember in college, 1975, when the first near-death experience book came out, Life After Life by Raymond Moody. He was the founder of it. And I remember I read that book in college, and I was like, wow. And it was like, and the thing I liked about it too, there was most of these people met this being of love and light, nothing about Jesus, nothing about Christianity. It was all very, very new agey. All new, that's what it is. And some people have warned, it was interesting, Christianity Today, years ago. And again, these are people who do not understand the state of the dead. Christianity Today are evangelical, the whole package, dead right to heaven, right to hell, and all the rest. Even Christianity Today kind of warned, we better be a little careful. This could be demonic deceptions because it's very, very new agey. And most of these people who had NDEs were not practicing Christians before, and nothing happened during that led them to think they needed to be afterwards. After all, you just have this wonderful experience in heaven. No condemnation with the being of light, and all that. So who needs Jesus anyway then? Because they didn't have him before, and there was no need, they believe, to have him now. And again, it's a powerful, powerful, powerful deception. And if you do not understand the state of the dead, you have absolutely no protection. And I mentioned earlier this guy, Kirk, if you know the name, Kirk Cameron. He was an evangelical blogger, and he dared to insinuate that maybe hell doesn't burn you for all eternity, and the Protestant evangelical world was out to slice his throat. They were brutal. They were vicious against this man. So if they're so locked into that, you think you're going to get them to change? Most of them on the state of the dead, with them going right to heaven, go right to hell. I have tried. In fact, I gave a Bible study a while back to a guy just about eternal torment. You know what his words to me were? Cliff, you're scaring me. It didn't scare him, the thought of the dead being destroyed instead of burned. What scared him was his whole life. He believed in eternal torment. And now suddenly, as an older guy, to change on that, and if he, that way, try to get him on the state of the dead, he wouldn't study it with me. And he said his wife didn't want him to study it. Okay, that's how locked in they are with this. Okay, and also, so that's powerful. And also, despite our efforts, as I said, Catholics and Protestants, they're firmly wedded to Sunday. And I have watched over the decades these Catholics, I've heard Catholics basically and Protestants say the Reformation is over. We're over. We're no longer divided and so on. I mean, there's there were these documents that came out 20-some years ago, evangelicals and Catholics together, basically all saying we've got the same gospel. See, what happened was, on that, it was amazing how the links that they had together. See, the problem was they were united in their opposition to abortion. But they had the slight problem of the gospel, because they got Catholic gospel and the Protestant gospel, totally separate things. So they had to get this little problem of the gospel out of the way. And they had all these meetings, and just as Ellen White said, Rome hasn't changed a thing. It's the Protestants who have changed and have gone right along. Oh yeah, Rome has the gospel. They have the gospel. Are you kidding me? It's not, look, in the end, the word anti doesn't necessarily mean against, it means in place of. You know what Rome's gospel is? Everything. Look, I'm an Adventist. I love the Adventist church. I believe the biblical teaching of the corporate body. But I don't need the Adventist church to be saved. It's between me and Jesus. And Jesus' righteousness covers me and Jesus. In Rome, see, they'll say, oh, they believe in right. Rome knows how to lead these dupes around by the nose. Oh, we believe in justification. We believe in faith. But everything you get, all the salvation you get from Jesus, from Rome, you have to get through the institution of Rome itself. Suppose the GC said, we have all the merits at the GC of Jesus' righteousness. And if you want his righteousness, if you want his forgiveness, you have to have it mediated through the organization itself. In other words, in place of Christ. Everything that we know, we get directly from God. You've got to get it through Rome. That's the essence of Antichrist. And they haven't changed a bit. And the Protestants just ignored it. And they're, oh, we're unified. Exactly as we as Adventists have been teaching for decades. And you got to remember, too, in the there was violence. There were anti-Catholic riots in the streets of America in the 1800s. They're the native, the KKK in the beginning was more against Roman Catholics than anything else, and so on. It's not talked about anymore because it's not an issue, exactly as we have predicted it would be. And again, all this will help America. You know, it's kind of funny. I'm a patriotic American. I love my country. I really do, to the degree you should. I believe in America. And yet, we're in a difficult, because it's the goon in the last days. It's the bad boy. It's one of the two bad boys in the last days. And I remember years ago, I was in Paris for they call it the 14 Juillet. It's their French, they're celebrating the French Revolution. It's the 14th of July in Paris. It's their 4th of July. And they're celebrating the French Revolution. And I remember thinking, I wonder how the French Adventists deal with that. And I thought, wait a minute, that's kid stuff. You're an American Adventist. How do you deal with what Bible prophecy says about America? You know, it's interesting. A few years ago, Atlantic Monthly had an article about, talking about the coming civil war inevitable or something in America. And it said, we don't believe that those conditions in the United States resemble those of the 1850s in America, leading to the Civil War. But we worry that the ties that bind us are fraying at an alarming speed. We are becoming contemptuous of each other in ways that are both dire and possibly irreversible, writes an editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg, in an introduction to the December Atlantic's issue, How to Stop a Civil War. And then he says in there, the American experiment as we know it is not guaranteed to be eternal. It's not guaranteed to be eternal? Well, yeah, we know that as Adventists. In other words, we would say the lamb-like beast of Revelation 13 will speak like a dragon and will cause as many as not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Of course, that's not what the ad said, but for what prophecy to come to pass, what that ad said, some degree or another, is going to have to happen. I have no idea how it's all going to come about. But all I know, man, you look at the state of the country today. And, I used to, from the pulpits, I used to always, especially when I was in religious liberty, I used to joke from the pulpits on politics. If I were in a conservative church, I'd rib the conservatives. If I were in a liberal church, I'd rib the liberals. I don't touch it now. I don't touch it. It's been amazing in the past 10 years. I mean, even when my family, I'll say to don't talk politics around your mother or something, okay? Just don't do it. It's been, and it was never that way. I guess I'm different. I don't care. I don't care whether you're liberal, conservative, you can love Trump, you can hate Trump, whatever. It doesn't matter my personal relationship with you. But man, there are others who, anyway, I'm old enough, I remember the Vietnam War. I remember the rancor of them. I mean, there were bombs, the SDS, every other day bombs were going off. Yet even at the height of Vietnam War, even after the Kent State shooting, I have not one memory of anybody ever talking about civil war in America. And now this article all but seems to assume one's going to come, And it's a little frightening about the difference. It's a total loss of trust. I mean, who here really trusts I have absolutely no respect for the news media. No, I think they're evil, okay? I don't trust a whole lot that the government says. I haven't for a long time. And I've mentioned to some earlier, I travel overseas and I got this, I forgot, I'm so used to it, global entry. So I don't have to go through passport lines. So I discovered the problem is you whip right through, but then you feel like you wait forever for your luggage. You know, you whip through the passport lines and then you got to stand there for 30 minutes waiting for your luggage. But I'll never forget, they keep updating it. And about 2 years ago, I go through this separate line. Before I had to stop at a kiosk and put my fingerprints on. And I don't stop anywhere. I never take my passport out. I just walk right up. There's a little screen. I look at the screen. Zip, 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 zip. Go ahead. In other words, it knows who I am by my face and knows my passport valid or not. I mean, it was a little creepy. It was a little, you might as well, again, I don't know how prophecy is going to play out. I said too, what we have to be careful, we have to be careful. I said earlier, the Bible paints last day events in very broad strokes. Said this in Sabbath school, that's why I didn't want to get too much into that. Sister White comes in and paints in broad strokes, not as broad as Scripture, but still broad enough. And when you start trying to speculate, when you start thinking, oh, this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, and this is going to, this way, inevitably, things don't often turn out the way we think they're going to. We have the broad outlines. And two, think about COVID-19. And I don't want to get in whether you're pro-vaccination or anti-vaccination. I don't care. I did it only just to get the GC off my back, but I could have just as easily not done it. I didn't care. And I didn't have to. My staff refused to do it. Me, I don't want to. I'm a company man. The GC says, get it, I got it. That's just me. But my staff, my wife would. But look at how fast, overnight, everything changed. Look at how everything changed. Look at how quickly. And so again, imagine something like that 10 times worse. It's still hard to see. Admit, it's still hard to see how our prophetic scenario could play out. But it was hard to see how it could have played out in the mid-1800s and late 1800s when Ellen White wrote about it. But it wasn't easy to see a Messiah nailed to a cross. That's not how people expected prophecy to unfold. And yet I'll say it's much easier to see it now, to see America fulfilling its prophetic role now than the time of early Adventism and at the time of the writing of the Great Controversy. Again, America remains the world's greatest superpower. Nobody comes close. Our military, it's amazing. It's amazing, the technology. I lived for 35 years in the D.C. area, and I knew some of these guys involved in this, and it's like they say, you just can't believe what our weapons could do, the effectiveness of our weapons. Yet at the same time, our democracy seems more fragile than I've ever remembered it. There's been rancor. I remember Watergate? They basically threw out of office the most powerful man in the world. And what happened? Were there tanks in the streets? Was there martial law? Nothing. Nixon gets in a helicopter, goes away. Ford puts his hand on a Bible, swears allegiance to the Constitution, and boom, life went on just as it did before. And they threw out the most powerful man in the world. Okay? So our democracy seems very fragile compared to what it was. Protestant Americans, they know absolutely nothing. All right, there's small groups. Well, there are even voices in Adventism. Oh, every, year or two, there'll be some left-wing Adventist writing on Spectrum or A Today. Oh, we got to change our view of Rome. Rome isn't what, blah, blah, blah. So if you've got Adventists are missing the boat on that. The Protestants today know almost nothing about Rome as Antichrist. They're focused on the latest wars in the Middle East. So that powerful fulfillment of prophecy. Catholics and Protestants, again, as I said, they're firmly wedded to their Lord's Day. Though we already said how they keep their Lord, but try to take it from them or try to challenge it from them. And then that Heritage Foundation came out with this statement about it. As I mentioned in Sabbath school, these statements have been coming out for a long time. It's really nothing new. But it got the North American division, and I commend them for it, came out with a strong statement against it. So the idea of we're a long way from the mark of the beast, but the idea of Sunday, particularly in the context of this Christian nationalism. I've read a number of books on Christian nationalism. They're all whack jobs. They're total whack jobs, but a lot of Christians are total whack jobs. And they have a certain mind frame that could make them fit this. And Sunday, they almost all, at some point or another, talk about the need for a day of rest, being legislated. And they're talking, obviously, about Sunday. And then, too, as I said, they are clueless about the state of the dead. The vast majority have bought in the dead go right to heaven, right to hell, and I've discovered I've rarely met one who's even open. They're even open to listening to anything different about it. They don't want to hear it. So, man, can you imagine the potential deceptions that could bring in the last days when they have no, I lived for 35 years in the D.C. area, and they got the big Mormon temple there. And when I first got here, and I don't know whether this is true or not, because, Mormonism, that is pure demonic. I just got done reading a biography of Joseph Smith. That is pure demonic stuff right to the core. And according to rumor I had heard, that in the temple, they say that George Washington and some of these other early American founders spoke to them and told them, you're doing right, keep doing, you've got the truth, and so on. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if you don't know the state of the dead. And again, if COVID-19 didn't show how rapidly and radically our world could change, what's going to? I remember I talked to my sister one day who's not an Adventist, and she said it's like we're in a science fiction movie. And didn't it have that kind of feel? It really had that kind of feel. It wasn't so bad. I moved to Tennessee in the middle of the COVID thing. And down there, Tennessee, it really didn't affect my life at all. It didn't affect a few places they wanted you to wear a mask and a few places stuff. But I don't think down there in Tennessee, they seem to have ignored it pretty much. Okay. Now, I don't know when final events will unfold. I really don't know. And I don't only know how they're going to unfold. We don't know the details. We know the broad outline of it. And if you look at the trends, you have to just look at trends. Don't get hung up on individual incidents. They could point to something, but I talked earlier in Sabbath school. You know how many of these independent ministries, this is it, Sunday law in 2 years. This is it, Sunday law. And that's been going on since I've been in Adventist 40-some years. And what do you know? No Sunday law at this time. Okay, all I know is we need to be ready. We must claim for ourselves Jesus' perfect righteousness. We claim for ourselves his perfect righteousness substituted as your own. Think about this, folks. Time comes. Here, it's very simple. Bible talks about judgment. We shall give an account of every deed. When you have to stand before a holy God with every single thing you did wrong exposed before a holy God, how are you going to survive? Anybody here think they could survive? You have to have Jesus in the judgment, lifting his wounded hands and pleading, my blood, resting totally on the merits of Jesus. We stay faithful to him, and part of that faithfulness for what Jesus has done for us, for this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. And one of those commandments is the fourth commandment. That and that alone is how we prepare for final events. And until then, we as Adventists, with Liberty Magazine, I edited Liberty. In fact, I got my start writing in my first public thing I ever published in the Adventist Church in the early 80s was an article in Liberty Magazine. I loved it then, and I love it now. I don't see it as much. Nobody else is. There are other people advocating for religious freedom, but nobody is advocating it from our perspective, from the spin that we put on it. A lot of these religious freedom groups are almost anti-religion. They're almost anti, anything at all. And so we've had Liberty Magazine now, I think it's now for 120 years. Liberty Magazine has been sounding it, and it's only Adventist. We were not funded by the denomination when I edited it, and I don't imagine it's any different. We got a bit of money from the GC, mostly for salaries, and then everything else depended on the church members, the donations of the church members. And Liberty has gone to a lot of leaders in this country. You hear all sorts of stories. Some of them, they're allowed to hear a lot of rumors when I was editor, and I wanted to be careful not until I could have it verified. But they told me one president was so busy reading Liberty, his friends, his other people said, come on, you got to get to work. So that sounds a little exaggerated. But anyway, it's what we do as a church. It's part of how we preach. It's part of us. We preach the three angels' message. The foundation is the everlasting gospel. That's got to be the foundation. But then we have our warning about end-time events, what's going to take place and how we can prepare. And as far as I know we are the only people in the world who are doing that. And we still need your members' help to keep spreading that message.